Welcome to the Fried Egg Golf Podcast. I'm Garrett Morrison, and today we're talking about the state of amateur golf with Lawrence Donegan. But first, before we get into that, we're going to talk about what we're in on and what we're out on this week. Here to do that with me is Joseph LaMagna. Joseph, what are you in on?
Garrett, I am in on the unexpected, wonderful golf weekend that we had the Women's Olympics, which was a super exciting finish with Lydia Ko. You don't always know that you're going to get a compelling finish down the stretch. She had to play great golf, and she did play great golf. Was super emotional when she won. Thought that was a delightful ending to a great Olympics, both on the men's and the women's side. And then we got the little cherry on top yesterday evening with Matt Kuchar's debacle at the Wyndham Championship, which I don't know how plugged you were to that situation, Garrett, but in case anyone missed it, every golfer got done with a marathon of play at Sedgefield after rains, storms. They crammed everybody in except for one, Matt Kuchar, who returned to finish on Monday morning. If you somehow missed it, he was completely out of contention. T12, missed the FedEx Cup playoffs, just nothing. I mean, there is still some fall positioning to play for, but very little to play for. And decided that he was not going to finish the 18th hole due to darkness, despite the other guys in his group finishing. And he came out, made a nice dramatic par this morning as we're recording this. So you never know what kind of weekends you're going to get in August. It could have been sleepy, but between Lydia Ko and Matt Kuchar, I loved that windfall we got this past weekend.
Yeah. Created an extra day of work for all the tournament staff. And, was just doing Matt Kuchar things. I think my favorite part of this was his explanation of why he did that. He was trying to set an example, right? He was trying to set an example for a playing partner of his. And this playing partner happens to be 29 years old.
He apologized to everyone today that he had to be the one that didn't get to finish. I loved the passive language there, as if some wrong had been done to him. Right.
He didn't do it. It happened to him.
But I'm in on that.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed to be pretty delightful. I was actually out at dinner with some neighbors when this was all happening, but I came back and it was one of those things where I had to gradually piece together what was going on from a variety of different tweets. And that's always an interesting process. But eventually the picture came into focus. This is Matt Kuchar being Matt Kuchar. And that is always pretty funny. But we haven't seen it in a while from Kuchar. He's been a little bit obscure lately. Hasn't really been a factor. But man, when he gets back in the spotlight, he really seems to make the most of it. So all credit to him.
Good to have him back. Yeah. What are you in on, Garrett?
I'm in on men's and women's fields playing simultaneous or back-to-back tournaments at the same venue.
Okay.
This has obviously been tried a couple of times. It hasn't worked that well. It does work well at the Vic Open in Australia, where this is the format of the tournament. They play simultaneously. They kind of mix the men's and women's fields together. And it seems to really give that tournament an identity, and people are excited about it. There's a 36-hole facility that they play at that helps it all function. Didn't really work that well when they tried it at the Australian Open. The Aussies seem to be going after this a bit, like trying to make this happen, which is a great thing. But they did it at the Australian Open, and the logistics seem to have not worked that well. So there are ways that these simultaneous tournaments can come off well, and there are ways that they can fail. And so you just have to execute it right. I also think it's interesting to see men's and women's fields playing back-to-back tournaments at the same venue, as they did at the Olympics at Le Golf National, as they did at those U.S. Opens back in 2014 at Pinehurst, and I believe a repeat of that structure of the U.S. Opens, the Women's Open as well as the Men's Open, is coming up in a few years as well. And so this is being tried, but whenever it happens, I love it. As a golf nerd, seeing men's and women's fields playing the same course in very different ways, seeing different holes be set up in distinct ways is really interesting. Something that I wish maybe the telecast made more of or showed more of. I do think people would be interested in that if they were delivered that kind of content. So I'd just like to see more experimentation here. And obviously, I think that this kind of mashing up of the men's and women's games could potentially really help the women's game reach a larger and more enthusiastic audience than the LPGA Tour seems to have so far this year. This season has been really interesting on the LPGA Tour for a number of reasons, Nelly Korda being one big one, but it just doesn't seem to be gaining much public momentum. And so I'd like to see the powers that be try to figure out how to unlock some of that enthusiasm that surely would be there if women's golf tournaments were presented properly and given a stage to shine. So yeah, like this idea of the men's and women's fields being kind of in the same place at the same time and playing the same course.
Yeah, I thought it was super cool during the US Open at Pinehurst in 2014 how some of the women were out watching the men's tournament and warming up, getting ready for their week, like as the men were playing theirs tournament. It'd be cool to see it go in the other direction too. But I mean, scheduling is just a huge part of that, right? Like none of those guys were sticking around in Paris after they were done with the Olympics. Some of them had to come play the Wyndham Championship. So this just gets into the scheduling and the lack of cooperation generally. But Garrett, I guess, where do you land on some kind of mixed team event at the 2028 Olympics? Like that seems, there are people of two minds on that one. This version of the Olympics worked very well, and the individual portion of this seemed to motivate players both on the men's and the women's side to where now the Olympics is an unbelievably compelling event. Like, let's not do away with that, right? Like, let's not try something that gets away from a winning formula. But there are only 2 weeks to run these events. So do you think that doing a team mixed event in between is the winning formula? Like, how do you think this comes to fruition? Because I think a team mixed event would be super compelling. I just don't want to jeopardize something that's already special.
It's hard to work it out because, yes, the stroke play tournaments, now that we're 3 editions in, seem to have gained their own identity. You know, there were objections, and including, I would imagine, from me. I don't exactly remember what I said about this at the time, but when I heard that they were doing 72-hole stroke play, I was disappointed. For the Olympics. I wished that they had been a little more daring and creative. But now that that's what we've settled on, this is the Olympics tournament now. It has that identity and it has that kind of tradition so far. It's not much of a tradition yet because, again, only 3. But this is what it is. And so we've got to keep that and we've got to build on that. But yeah, I'd love to see a mixed team event. I'd love to see some match play, some kind of teammate interaction between players, which we don't get right now. But I just don't know how that's going to be worked out practically. And furthermore, I think that especially the men are at their limit with the Olympics of what they're willing to do for free. They've got the President's Cup. I mean, none of this is, they're not doing it for free. They're getting paid in a number of different ways for these things. But, it's not big prize money. They've got the Olympics. They've got the President's Cup. They've got the Ryder Cup. I fear that adding more Olympic events would just set up those events as well as the existing ones that we already have for failure. I think there would be some attrition. I think there would be players who would balk at doing not just the 72-hole stroke play, but also the additional event. I think there would be players who wouldn't want to go that far with it. And that's unfortunate. I don't think that's the right thing or the right attitude necessarily. I think that's just the reality.
I haven't thought too much about the optimal format, but thinking about it right now in real time, I could see some kind of, it doesn't need to be 4 days. Like, what if at the very front end of the Olympics in 2028, there's like a 2-day team mixed event where like maybe it's 1 day of best ball in the morning, alternate shot in the afternoon, and then they take the top 4 teams and do some kind of little match play the next day. Like, that's not a huge lift. It's a decent amount of golf for the teams that go all the way to the finals, but I think if you ask 4 days of them, they're much less likely to say yes. if it's 2 days and they get a little bit of time to play the golf course, get ready for their own individual stroke play events, it could be a cool way to set the stage. So maybe they should experiment with an abbreviated format, some kind of sprint 1 or 2 day event. I think would be pretty cool.
Little prologue.
Yeah. I mean, imagine seeing Minjee Lee and Minwoo Lee play together as brother and sister. Cool. Like, that would be incredible.
Yeah. All right, Joseph, what are you out on?
I'm out on the stranglehold that ranking systems have over the professional golf world, just in general. And
oh my.
I know that the official world golf rankings has been in the crosshairs a lot. Team Europe, in announcing their criteria for how you're going to qualify for the Ryder Cup in 2025, did not include any official world golf ranking. It's not included as part of the criteria as how you get points. And it was part of their criteria in 2023. That was how 3 of the spots were allocated, was based on official world golf ranking. I think the second order effects of what ranking systems do, there are benefits. It's cool to see that some player was in the top 10 for however many consecutive weeks, or was in the top 10 in 2010 and then again in 2020. And you see these, you evaluate the players' legacies and windows of their careers via the official world golf ranking. So I think it has its positives. But the way that it funnels players to one tour, or as we may talk about on this podcast as a little teaser, like the WAGR, the amateur golf rankings, some of the knock-on effects that has, if you're deterring players from showing up because it's going to impact their rankings, either as an amateur or as a professional, that's just one of the cons to having a ranking system. And I do think the golf world should consider if potentially the golf world would be better off without having a ranking system that had some of these negative effects, like preventing players from showing up because they're prioritizing their rankings, or funneling players into one location, in this case, America on the men's side. It is a worthwhile conversation to consider some of the benefits of going away from or making ranking systems less central to the golf ecosystem, so to speak.
What would happen if we just eliminated all of them tomorrow? If we just did like a Thanos snap and all of the world ranking systems in golf just disappeared? What do you think would happen then?
I think you'd have a bunch of qualifiers into tournaments, which would be really cool. So
yeah,
like major
Monday
championships.
Q would love that. Ryan French would be very happy.
I think it would be cool, but you could do a lot of, if you finish in the top of this event, you're automatically in. Like, that's a way you could round out fields. So, if you finish in the top 20 of the Masters, maybe you're back the next year. Like, there are ways that you could do it. The main con is that you'd have a hard time saying, hey, who's the best player in the world right now? But there's already debates about that. And on the men's side, like, Live Golf doesn't get official world golf rankings points. So people have already been saying, well, maybe Bryson's the best player in the world. It's not a great argument, but we already deal with that issue. So I think you'd have a lot more of a qualifier-based system into getting into certain golf tournaments. And I think that would probably be a better version of golf. But, and this is not to tease our upcoming interview too much, but I think this is probably more of a problem on the amateur side even than on the professional side. So people know. I think I'm going to be digging into the World Amateur Golf Rankings a little bit, and if people are super knowledgeable on that, feel free to reach out. But it does seem like it causes a lot more problems than it solves.
A little off-season project for Joseph. I like it. A little long-form, long-term investigation of world ranking systems. I like that idea.
It's worth looking at. What are you out on, Garrett?
I am out on denying that you said the F word on live television when you clearly said the F word on live television. Morgan Pressel, an announcer during the Olympics, said about Brooke Henderson at one point. Brooke Henderson had just hit a good shot and had like high-fived or fist-bumped her caddy or something. Morgan Pressel said, "She's fucking fired up. You love to see it." And it was funny. People shared the clip around social media. It was just a little extra sideshow during the competition. Something to chuckle about, Nothing particularly offensive. We all know that she didn't really mean to say that probably what she meant to say was she's frickin' fired up or freaking fired up, and it just came out the wrong word. But she did say the F word. She said it. It's on air. We all heard it. Pressel's statement the next day. I stumbled over my words, and unfortunately it sounded as if I said something inappropriate. I am so sorry that it came across as such, because I would never say that on air in a broadcast. So, I mean, listen, this isn't that serious. This isn't that bad. But she's not saying I said it and it was just a slip. She said, I didn't say it. It just came across like you may have thought that you heard that, but I would never. That was the tactic. And it's just this kind of gaslighting approach to PR cleanup that so many golfers seem to think is the way to do things, but it's not the way to do things, because we all know that you're lying. You're not, this is not the truth. You said what you said, and you might as well just own it and say, listen, sorry about that. I don't even need her to apologize. Maybe some people do. Maybe she needs to, but I accidentally said the wrong word and egg on my face. My bad. That's really all you need to do. And Zach Johnson, the same thing at the Masters when he told the gallery in Amen Corner to fuck off. We all heard it. We all saw it. We knew what he was doing. And he flat out denied it, said he was saying it to himself. It's not what happened. Guys, just admit it. Just say, I'm fallible. That's my bad, and laugh it off. But that's not what people seem to want to do in trying to clean up these messes. So we're left with kind of being gaslighted. But in any case, just thought I'd point that out. I thought it was a fun part of the weekend. And by the way, they DMCA'd the clip almost immediately. And so it's no longer really available on Twitter or wherever else. And so that's just another thing that they do to try to memory hole certain things that happen during golf tournaments.
Look, this is bigger than golf, right? It's the art of apologizing. It's the I'm sorry if you were offended.
Art of the non-apology.
Right,
This is not an apology. It's like, I'm sorry that you guys were
sorry that
so
you took it that way.
Weird that you heard me say this when I didn't.
Right. And I think the main lesson, when you watch people apologize successfully and just own it, it works better. Like this is not a good strategy. So
it becomes like a good thing for them.
Right. Like just own it. So I'm with you. I don't have much to add. This is much bigger than golf. It happens in all fields, but I think people need to learn that the right approach is just to own it. So I'm with you, Garrett. I'm out on that too.
All right. Something I am in on is Good Walk Coffee. Let's talk about Good Walk Coffee for a second here. In my mug right now, I've got my Good Walk mug here, is the fried egg golf blend from Good Walk. It is delicious. It's about 9 a.m. Where I'm recording this, and so this is helping me wake up. In fact, this is my second cup of the morning, so that's kind of my cadence through the morning. But fried egg golf blend is absolutely delicious. It's a bright and vibrant organic coffee roasted to a medium light level. We also have some other blends for those who prefer other kinds of roasts. But Good Walk is a great company that we're very proud to be working with. The founders are absolute golf nuts, and they also happen to be coffee nuts. They buy high-grade beans from around the world at fair market prices. And very importantly, these beans happen to be extremely good. So go to goodwalkcoffee.com/friedegg and use the code friedegg, one word, at checkout to save 20% on your entire order. Using the same code to start a coffee subscription will save you 30% on your first order, and then you'll save 10% on all future shipments. You can pause, skip, or cancel your subscription at any time on the website. So again, go to goodwalkcoffee.com/friedegg. All right, so Joseph, we've got an interview with Lawrence Donegan coming up, and the subject is amateur golf. The occasion is that the U.S. Women's Amateur just wrapped up yesterday at Southern Hills, and the U.S. Amateur is getting underway right now at Hazeltine. Those tournaments are just always a delight to watch. So first of all, I would definitely recommend tuning in this week and watching the golf. But Lawrence Donegan is the person we're talking to about amateur golf. And he's many things in golf media. He's a veteran journalist who has written for The Guardian and The Herald and other outlets. He's also the founder of McKellar Magazine, as well as the co-host of the McKellar podcast, along with Jeff Shackelford. But maybe most relevant to this episode, he is the father of an excellent young amateur golfer who is playing this week in the U.S. Amateur at Hazeltine. So Lawrence has a lot of thoughts, a lot of takes about amateur golf, such an interesting guy to talk to. And so let's just go straight to that interview. Okay, so Joseph and I are here with Lawrence Donegan. Lawrence, it's great to have you on the podcast. How are you doing right now?
Thanks for having me on, Garrett. Hi, Joseph. We've never met before, so here we are.
Yeah, we'll just dive right into it. Joseph will chip in when he wants to chip in. But just to get us started, we're going to talk about amateur golf, about the amateur golf scene, about some of the issues and also some of the joys of participating in amateur golf. You have a unique perspective on this, Lawrence, not only because you're a longtime golf journalist, but because your son, Niall, is a very good player who has, in fact, qualified for the U.S. Amateur. So just briefly, to give people a sense of what your perspective is on the world, what was the U.S. Amateur qualification experience like for you?
Well, it was great for me because as is my wont, I wasn't there. I act as a chauffeur. I take young Niall. He's not that young. He's 19. I took him. I always drop him off at the golf course pre-round an hour and a half before. Then I disappear. I go into town. I go and find a coffee shop. I go and read a book. I go and tour. In that particular instance, I went into Bend. He was qualifying at Bend Golf Club for final qualifying for the amateur, and then I tried my best not to look at my phone. The live scoring, I know people love live scoring. It's a curse. It's an absolute curse. If you look at live scoring, your entire day is ruined. So I do my best not to look at live scoring. Otherwise, the whole day is ruined. That's all you can think about, because it is. I mean, we're all the same. If you've got kids, you don't want them to be hurt or to fail. It's just like a parent watching a kid do anything. Your kid comes home and says, "I got a D in an exam." So I see the kind of golf process as a little bit like that. That particular day, I didn't see any live scoring. Drove back to the golf course, and it's really funny, Garrett. Even when you come into the car park, and you can tell how your son walks. If I see him in the distance walking up, I look away because I don't want to know where he is. I mean, it's pathetic, isn't it? It sounds so awful. But it was really funny in that particular day. So his mum was pulling his trolley that day, Maggie. And so she doesn't really know much about golf. So I walk back into the car park, round in, and he's at the tent, the scorer's tent. So I walk up and I said to Mum, "How do you do?" And she said, "I don't really know. Quite well, I think." And then Niall sitting at the desk, and I go, "Well, how did it go?" And he did the usual. He just held the 8 fingers down, which is really cool.
What a badass!
Oh, that was really great. He told me that was. I think he shot 64 a couple of times in tournament somewhere. But I think that he's never qualified for a USG event. I think he tried. USGA Junior Am a couple of times, didn't make it. I got through to final qualifying in the USGA for the US Open, actually. Was first alternate. This is quite a good funny story. Took him to Olympic Club. He was first reserve. And 5 minutes before, some guy never showed up. So he jumped on the first tee and off he went. And he was right behind. He's had to say, Maverick McNeely had a golf coach called Alex Murray. And Niall's gone to the same coach. So McNeely was in the group in front. So that, he's 16 years old, he's 17, really thrilling stuff. But this is a big deal. You qualify for the USAM is a really big deal. So we leave for Hazeltine. We're recording on Wednesday. We leave on Thursday. And then I think the first round's next Monday and Tuesday. So really looking forward to that. He's actually, his longtime Little League coach is going to come over and caddy for him. So that's pretty cool. In fact, his name's Todd Mutafi, and Todd now qualified. He won his regional qualifier for the Open this year, and Todd flew over from our home, where we live in Northern California, over to caddy for him at Royal Singapore. So it's kind of cool. It kind of takes a village, doesn't it? Mum, little league caddy, dad drives. It's a really cool experience, actually, especially for somebody like me. I just love golf. I love watching amateur golf. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, quite a qualifying round for young Niall. He was medalist by, I believe, 4 strokes, and so that is a way to qualify for the U.S. Amateur. He played college golf last year at Northwestern, so clearly a very good young player. I met him at Chambers Bay when I came and talked to you, Lawrence, and seems like a great kid, and so we're rooting for him at the USAM. But kind of backing up and zooming out a bit.
Yeah.
What have you learned about parenting through this amateur golf process? Because, I mean, this is a serious amateur player. I'm sure you've seen some pretty intense parenting in this area. I wonder if you've kind of adjusted your thoughts over time about how to do that.
Well, some people might look at me and say I'm an intense parent. Well, I'm never at the golf tournaments, but I kind of evolved over the years. I coached all sorts of things, Garrett. I coached soccer, football as we would call it. I got middle school golf team. What else? God, baseball, little league, all that kind of stuff. And I used to have a really, hands off, parents light touch, but it's hard. I see it at golf tournaments. I've seen some horrendous stuff at golf tournaments. When Niall was really young, he didn't play a lot of tournament golf, but you see parents cheating, and you'd go and pick him up after a golf tournament, and you say, "How did it go?" And it was really good, but little Johnny's dad threw the ball back in the fairway, and stuff like that. So. But see, the longer I go on and I look at the guys now, I better be careful here, because I don't want to, shame's the wrong word. But I see some parents who I've known for years and have really reputations for being really intense, really hands-on, hovering. All you would think, all the worst traits, but but then you see their kids are, they're now college seniors and they're winning big tournaments. Or they're doing really, really well. So when I say I've evolved, I just think it's, there's just different ways of doing it. There's no right way or wrong way, I don't think. I used to think there was a right way and a wrong way, but now I'm really not so sure. I guess whatever works for a particular family, for a particular parent, for a particular kid. Of course, you hear stories all the time of great players who are completely turned off by the pushy parents and the great junior players, but they just get ground down. They get forced into doing it. And they eventually get to the stage where they're no longer under their parents' control and they just rebel and they kind of pack it in. I think the pushy, very pushy, intense approach works with kids who love golf, really, really love golf. But for the kids who are kind of ambivalent, then I don't think the strong parenting thing works.
Yeah, I mean, Tiger Woods comes to mind. Maybe the most famous father-son relationship in golf. And I mean, it certainly worked in the sense that the player became incredibly good, and the parenting was quite intense by most people's standards.
Yeah, I actually interviewed Errol at the house in Cyprus in Southern California. I went down and interviewed Errol about a couple of years before he died. Yeah, that was amazing. You walk up to the house and this like modest suburban kind of house, but with this incredible door. This really elaborate, it's like a door for a $3 million house in Laguna Beach or something. And you walk in, the door opens, and Errol's sitting in the Barca lounger with his cigarettes stamped out in his soup dish. And the room is filled with all these trophies, everything. Just amazing. And yeah, super intense. He took me to the garage, and he said the chair, this house is prepared for the Smithsonian, he said. So the door was built for the Smithsonian. The garage was preserved. This is the chair where Tiger sat watching me hit balls into this particular net. So Errol was all in. But I guess what Errol had there was just a kid who loved golf, who just couldn't get enough golf.
Yeah, crazy for
it. Crazy for it. So, yeah, as I say, it takes all kinds of stuff, all kinds of methods.
So from your perspective and your experience, what has been the best thing about amateur golf for you, just from the parents' perspective?
Well, I can't separate the parents and the golf fan. I mean, the parents thing is just seeing our kid. He's not an amazing player. I think he's right. I don't know, it's 300 in the world or something. He's a good player. He might get better. He might get worse. Who knows? But just seeing your kid just do something that he loves, and gets a certain amount of confidence from it and self-respect. I mean, but again, and respect from others. I think that's a big deal. Because once you get into the kind of elite amateur golf level, what you fight, I mean, it's like a traveling circus. All these kids kind of know each other, and they're all kind of looking at each other. And it's quite, as a parent, speaking as a parent, it's really good to see your kid find a spot, a place in that world. And it's a world that he absolutely adores. All he wants to do is play golf, which wasn't always the case, as he was a multiple sport kid. And so from a parental perspective, that's wonderful to see your kid be in some way be fulfilled. As I say, who knows where it'll take him, and there'll be many. There's been many disappointments along the way, and I'm sure there'll be many in the future. And just to see how he gets through that, will it build his character? Will it, crush it? Not crush is the wrong word, but we'll see. I mean, so there's that aspect, but the main thing for me, I'm not going to lie, selfishly, I absolutely love amateur golf. I've always liked amateur golf, but being around. So I'll take Niall to Hazeltown next week, and I'll drop him off, and he'll do his thing, and I'll go to the other course, and I'll go and watch. It's just awesome. I keep on saying this to people. Why would you go to a PGA Tour event and be roped off 50 yards to the side? And you can't see anything. You can't really hear anything. I went to the regional at Stanford this year, the NC2A regional at Stanford, and I walked a few holes right down the fairway with Luke Clanton. I mean, come on. I mean, Luke Clanton's, I think he's playing his 4th PGA Tour event this year, coming up this week at the Wyndham. Just one of the best players in the world, walking down the fairway, 5 yards behind. Mike Clayton wrote a piece a couple of years ago that, the best way to watch golf is to watch it down the line, because you can really see the ball. And elite amateur events, that's what it's all about. It's, you can really see the guys who can play, the guys who can shape their ball, who can hit the shots. So there's that. Plus you get proximity. It's just awesome. I walked at that Stanford Regional. I walked with Thor Bjornsson. Walked a few holes with him, 10 yards away. Michael Thor Bjornsson. That's pretty cool. So I kind of get that. I love it. The other thing is, and these kids are really lucky. Now played in the Lynx Trophy this year. I don't know if people in the States would know what the Lynx Trophy is, but it's one of the big European amateur events. And it's 2 rounds, first 2 rounds, one in the Jubilee, great golf course in its own. And then the second is on the Old Course, and then the weekends at the Old Course. The entry fee for that was £80. So Niall's played the Old Course in the space
good way to
of
get
a
on
week.
The course.
It's
a little bit harder for the rest of us.
He's played the Old Course 4 times in a week for £80. So that's really cool. So you get to go and see great golf courses. This summer we went to the Old Course. I got to see that. Got to see elite golf in the Old Course. Then we went to the Amateur Championship, was up at Ballyliffin. There's 2 courses up there. The main thing was played in the Glashidi. But the great golf course there is the Old Course at Ballyliffin. That is a wonderful, wonderful golf course. So got to see that, got reintroduced to that. I'd been there 20 years ago. Royal Cinque Ports for final qualifying for the Open. My goodness. That was so cool. And he went off and played. He missed by a couple of shots, whatever. But I went and followed Matthew Southgate and Graham McDowell, which was awesome. Walking down the fairway, really cool, great golf course. We'll pass quickly over the Scandinavian for the European Amateur. That was an absolute shocker. Brilliantly conditioned golf course, but just such a terrible design. I know you guys like the design stuff. Not
the place you would go when going to that area of the world.
No, definitely not. And I'm trying to think what else. But the point is, it takes you. Amateur golf has taken me to some amazing golf courses to see them in a different way. Not from the point of view that I'm kind of hacking around an 85 or whatever, but to see great players playing these amazing golf courses. I watched Callum Scott play. Callum Scott, Walker Cup player for GB9 last year. I think he's number 5 in PGA Tour U this year. Watched him play the old course. That was a real education of how to play golf.
Lawrence, I'm glad you brought up the cost. £80 to play 4 rounds at St. Andrews. One topic that I wanted to get into a little bit with you is accessibility. And
totally.
I suppose there are at least 2 facets to that. One, like domain knowledge, and then 2, explicit financial costs. I'm curious if you can paint a little bit of a picture of amateur golf. I know it's different in America than in the rest of the world, but does a junior golfer need to be playing in AJGA, American Junior Golf Association events, for example, and like what the costs are associated with those? Can you kind of paint a picture of how an amateur golfer navigates the landscape?
I have had a years and years long feud with the AGGAG. I used to do this. I would go, this week, Niall's playing in the Scottish Men's Amateur at Western Gales, and the cost is £80. Alternatively, he could be playing in the AGGA something All-Star at some bullshit golf course in the middle of Texas for $350. I mean, just absolute nonsense. So two things about that. One, the cost. Certainly in Europe, it's a completely different paradigm over there. So in this country, it's been an AGGA monopoly in this country for years and years and years. And they've really exploited it. I mean, they'll listen to this and they'll go, yeah, but we have this player, fund for whatever, and it'll be, we give out $300,000 a year in player support or whatever. The CEO of the AGGA gets paid $1 million a year. $1 million a year. So the bureaucracy of the AGGA is propped up by these. It's just scandalous entry fees. So that's one thing, right? The ludicrous entry fees relative to what goes on in Europe. But the main point, and you touched on there, Joseph, it's just what talent has been missed in this country. I mean, nobody can afford this. We're lucky. We have the financial means, to be able to afford it. We chose not to do the AGGA for the reasons that I'm outlining to you. We just felt it was just ridiculous, outrageous. And the way it's designed is to it's brilliantly designed to lure players in. You got to get enough stars to get a place in the field, and but my other objection to the way that amateur golf, certainly junior golf in this country, in the US, is set up, it's so inaccessible. Who can afford this? A very, very small number of families. So that's kind of bad. It's a kind of bad thing, but also in terms of the talent missed. You go to an agent, in fact, this is true all over the world, actually, because golf is expensive. Pretty monochromatic, Joseph. You look up and down the range at any junior or amateur event, it's pretty monochromatic. Which is, the one good thing is this USGA set up this development program, which I think might break the monopoly of the AGGA. I think it's going to be like a ladder system, as I understand it. Feeding up from the local, like the Northern California Junior Golf, Southern California Junior Golf will all feed into this USGA development system, and it'll be like a pyramid, and the best players will go to the top. So what will happen, hopefully, is that the best players at the bottom of the ladder who can't afford to make the step up into the AGGA, they will be spotted and they will be elevated by the USGA, and hopefully, so the kind of missing of talent, that'll become less of an issue, you would hope. But the actual structure of it is, it's it's sickening. It's honestly sickening. Tiger Woods, when he made his Hall of Fame speech, you notice he spoke about his parents taking out a second mortgage so that he could play on the AGGA. People never noticed that. That's just a second mortgage to play junior golf. I mean, it's crazy. So a lot of families aren't able to do that. So back home, certainly in the UK and Europe, you'll notice now actually coming through, the national federations are golf is a little bit more accessible, and the tentacles of the national federations in places like Sweden, Germany, France, the UK, that reaches quite far down the pyramid, and they're kind of pulling kids out. And you can see that now. If you look at, well, who are the best players coming through from elite amateur golf in the last few years? I mean, obviously you've got Sargent, Thorbjornsen, but a lot of these guys are European. You know, Hovland, especially the Scandinavians, Hovland, Åberg. There's a kid in Sweden just now called Simon Hovald. Watch out for this kid. He's going to Texas Tech next year. This kid is unbelievable. There's a kid in the Czech Republic of all places. What's his name? I wrote it down. Louis Klein. He's 15 years old. I mean, this kid is unbelievable. Again, because of the national federations over there are a bit more proactive. The pyramid isn't so closed off. These guys are coming through. And I tell you what, I mean, the USA, you eventually, Golf in America will feel it when they get to the Ryder Cup and the Europeans start. I say this all the time. The 2035 European Ryder Cup team will all be continental players, but the continental development systems are so much better than anywhere else in the world. And PGA Tour and the USA and the USGA had better watch out, which is why this development thing that they brought up is a really good development. If it stayed the way it was, with the closed-off pyramid, the AGGA completely in control, golf in the United States would have been in trouble.
So while we're on the cost, Lawrence, one thing that's kind of troubled me that I really wanted to get your perspective on, the importance of TrackMan and seeing how much of an advantage it is at the highest level. I've always been curious what the trickle-down effects of that are. Are junior golfers, if you go out to a driving range at an elite amateur event, are there a bunch of TrackMans out there? And what does that mean for accessibility? Curious, again, for your perspective on the technology piece of this and how maybe that's raised the barriers to entry for golfers of little means.
Again, if you're part of a national federation setup, say you're part of the French setup, the French, they'll have TrackMan. You go to a tournament and the French guys, the two national coaches will have some TrackMans for the guys to use. I'm not going to lie. Again, we're lucky. We're financially kind of lucky. Now I've got a TrackMan. He got his own TrackMan. We kind of rationalised it in a way. We knew it was madness, but we kind of rationalised it in a way. The good thing about TrackMan, you can see, they're not like used cars. They don't depreciate to the extent. So you can buy a TrackMan and 3 years later and sell it for a 10, 15% depreciation. So as a family, we rationalised it in that way. But it's huge. It's you go to an elite amateur event now, and a lot of guys have got their TrackMan there. And I see Foresight. They do the quad. They're pitching a program now for elite players, elite younger players. So they're obviously they see it as a huge market. I'm not saying you can't compete at that level without access to launch monitors, but my goodness, it's a hell of an advantage. I know, again, a kid like ours is heavily influenced by what he sees at the PGA Tour. He looks at how did Dustin Johnson become a great wedge player? He just did TrackMan combines all day. As we speak right now, he's up at his golf club with his TrackMan. And I can guarantee you, he'll be doing combines all day or whatever he does. I don't know. And there'll be dozens and dozens and dozens of other kids in his position who'll be doing the same thing. It's huge. It's a huge thing. And if you don't have access to then you are at a disadvantage, because it's the same with you can see in professional golf, can't you? It's revolutionized the way that people play and think about golf, and it's the same at the elite amateur level as well.
On the idea of national federations,
yeah,
you mentioned a couple of Swedish players, I believe, or at least you mentioned Oberg.
Yeah.
It's funny to hear Maya Stark and Lynn Grant also talk about their experiences coming up through that system, knowing Ludwig and other really good players who ended up in the American university system in some form or another, or sometimes not. But that seemed to be a key formative experience for a lot of the best young players right now. And it's certainly, Australia has its version of this that has existed for a long time. And players like Adam Scott and others, Aaron Battley came up through that. I wonder if you think that applying that to the U.S. context would work, or whether we're just too big and unwieldy as a nation for something like this ever to exist.
I mean, I think it'll work here. I think the people who've designed it and Chris Zambri, who's running it, the guy who used to coach at the USC and Pepperdine, who's assistant coach at Pepperdine, I think. I think it's been very well designed. But again, they're basing it all. What it's all based on the European. Actually, it all started with the Australian Institute of Sport. That was so far ahead in terms of development of all sports, and golf was one of the sports because it's obviously a big deal over there.
Yeah, but maybe even less significant than the other Australian sports. And we're seeing that right now with the Olympics, where there are so many truly excellent Australian athletes, and that's not a coincidence.
There's some brilliant. I've watched hours and hundreds of hours of development nonsense, trying to discern if there's a correct way to do it. There's a great video of a former head of the Australian Institute of Sport going on about elite juniors. There's no such thing as an elite junior. And he was saying this stuff 10, 15 years ago. So they had thought about it, and they were big into tapering. It's called tapering, big into multiple sports. So they would, you actually got penalised within the system if you just concentrated on golf when you were age 13 or 14. Obviously Adam Scott wouldn't get penalised, but you know what I mean. So they thought long and hard about it. They kind of the template that everybody else has followed. Sweden, Germany, France, to a lesser, England's pretty good, but a lot of it depends on resources. I think the USGA, what do they have in the bank? I don't know, Garrett. This is the kind of number you probably know.
All I know is that it's a lot.
It's a lot. So they've got money to spend on it, and as I say, when it was announced, I was really hoping it was a shit show. It was going to be a shit show, and I could easily criticise it. But lo and behold, I think so far it's early days yet. And I do see some social media stuff that they've been putting out on the junior program, which I don't particularly like, elevating these superstar kids. I don't think that's the best thing for these kids at this stage. But nevertheless, I think it'll work.
All right. So a big thing that's affecting the amateur game, especially in the US right now, is all of the chaos in the pro game.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you just have some general thoughts or a general theory of how all of these structural shifts at the top end of the professional game are affecting the way that amateur golfers kind of make their way through their careers.
Well, yeah, it's a really interesting thing, this. And I can't quite decide whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing yet. It's been percolating for a while. Well, essentially, how can we frame this? Liv comes along. The shift was already. Firstly, the PGA Tour has always reached down into the amateur game. I mean, so Wyndham this week, the PGA Tour put out a video this morning. I saw it on their social media feeds. Justin Thomas, 16-year-old Justin Thomas, makes his debut at the Wyndham Championship in 2016. So the point is, the professional tours have always reached down into the amateur game and plucked out a few, the absolute best. Tiger played at Riviera when he was 16 or wherever he was, 15, I can't remember. So there's always been a little bit of that. But now with the advent of Live Golf coming along, there's like an arms race between the kind of establishment tours, a desperation. We call it youth desperation syndrome. There seems to be a real rush to promote younger players. I mean, again, I don't want to highlight individuals. And you know what? I don't know the personal circumstances or what's going on with, say, the family. There's a kid called Miles Russell. I'm sure everybody, if you're listening to this, everybody will know who Miles Russell is. He got an invite to the I think it was the Rocket Mortgage.
Yeah. He's the lefty kid. He got a lot of play on social media that week and on the telecast.
You know what? I mean, and that's great for him if that's what they want. But and there's this other kid, Blades Brown, another really good player actually. Now played a practice round with him a couple of years ago somewhere, and I was watching this and I'm thinking, oh shit, now you're in trouble here, boy. That kid can play, by the way. He's a good player. But what? So the PGA Tour is desperate. It doesn't want to lose. It doesn't want to lose players. There's Live Golf is coming. The first round of contracts at Live Golf are coming up for renewal, I think, at the end of this year. So Liv's going to be on the lookout for talent, and the PGA Tour knows that. It's really so. Hence, we have they already lost Caleb Surratt, really a brilliant player, won the Western Junior, really good player, played in the Walker Cup last year. He's a sophomore at Tennessee. Boom, he's gone. Went to Live Golf. He's now part of the infamous or famous, whatever you want, Legion 13 squad. I think he made about $3.5 million in his first week, so I think he's probably pretty happy. But coming round at the end of this year, Liv will be on the lookout for some fresh talent. And my goodness, if they look at, you look at the likes of Thor Bjornsson, you look at the likes of Luke Clanton, the rising junior at Florida State. I'm trying to think of other players. Ben James at Virginia, Jackson Coyven at Auburn. Really, really good players who've already proved that they can kind of cut it at the pro level. So there's that. And all these players all have agents, and they're not immune to are ignorant about what's out there for them if they want to go and take it. So the tour, is really, really, running fast to keep up. And that, so you have the accelerated program. Gordon Sargent got his tour card last year in the accelerated program, which if people don't know is it's all any number of points. If you win the US Amateur, you get 3 points. If you win the Ben Hogan Award, you get 3 points. And then once you hit 20 points, you automatically get your tour card. So Gordon Sargent got his tour card last year. You also obviously have got PGA Tour University, which has proven itself to be if nothing else, a great identifier of talent. The first three guys I think have gone through are Ludwig, Sargent. I think, did Sargent get it? Who got it last year? Ludwig. Thor Bjornsson got it. So you got Ludwig, you've got Thor Bjornsson. And this year, Luke Clanton's already miles ahead. So, although I think he's still a junior, so he won't be able to get it for another couple of years. But the point being that, for instance, the US Amateurs starts next Monday. Luke Clanton's playing. This is how it impacts. All of that impacts amateur golf. And Luke Clanton's playing at Wyndham this week. What if he makes the cut? He's playing on Sunday. Is he going to fly overnight and tee up in the US Amateur on Monday morning? I haven't seen the field yet for the US Amateur. I don't know if he's in. I don't know if he's out. But so a lot of these, they set up the elite. I don't know if people know. There's something called the Elite Amateur Series, which is 7 of the best amateur events. You have the North and South, the Northeastern, the Southern, the Pac Coast. A lot of the Sunny Hannah. A lot of the fields this year have kind of. You had the Western Amateur last week, and 3 of the top 5 amateurs in the world didn't play. Clanton didn't play. Who else? Summerhays didn't play, and Sargent didn't play. I don't know what the reasons were, but they're probably exhausted playing in PGA Tour events, and they got to take a week off. Once upon a time, nobody missed the Western. The Western was, behind the US Amateur. The Western was it.
It's a semi-major almost.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, you think, why wouldn't you be playing? Because there's actually 2 points for the PGA Tour Accelerated card. If you win it, if you win the amateur, the Western, you get 2 points. But again, so all this turmoil and noise within the pro games kicking down into the amateur game. Fields. There's so many events and. Guys are picking and choosing. Do you go play the Sunny Hannah or do you go and play in do you go and play on the Rocket Mortgage? I mean, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? You would kind of think. So it's there's also too many events, and I mean it's really the top players now are really picking and choosing. I think when you look at the amateur championship this year at Ballyliffin, that was a kind of remote spot for the R&A to pick. Great venue, but it was kind of remote. I mean, that was a pretty weak field this year relative to years gone by. That used to be a preeminent event with, by the way, a Masters invite, I think a US Open invite, and an Open Championship invite. And still, a lot of the best players in the world didn't bother. And it's because of all this noise and what's going on, in the pro games, it's kind of kicking down into the amateur game.
On that, Lawrence, earlier this year when Nick Dunlap won the American Express, he was kind of faced with a situation, hey, do I turn pro and start playing on the PGA Tour? He's only a sophomore in college. Can you maybe offer your perspective on, not necessarily Nick Dunlap specifically, but a player in that situation, an elite amateur who's navigating the landscape right now? How would you be charting out your trajectory given the options that might be available to you? Returning to school, playing on LIV, playing on the PGA Tour. What are those considerations? Well,
it's very hard. If you're Nick Dunlap, it's very, very difficult to say no. I mean, you win a PGA Tour event. That's so you can't criticize it. In the moment, how can you criticize somebody for taking a PGA Tour card? But I think you've got to be super careful. Gordon Sargent got his PGA Tour card through the accelerated program. Okay, didn't take it. Announced he's going to finish his junior year and he's going back to college, going back to Vanderbilt this year. I think that's a pretty smart move because brilliant player, incredible player. Went to the Masters, stunk the place out. He did. They were all talking about his ball speed and his clubhead speed. The guy he couldn't chip. He couldn't, and it was kind of obvious, and obvious to him. So I think he's done something really, really smart. Obviously, he's further bit. He's probably got all sorts of NIL deals going on, so there's no huge rush. But to turn pro and take the rewards that are there from in the short term. But he's done a pretty smart thing going back and understanding that his game isn't really quite ready for the pros. So again, as I say, you don't want to criticize somebody like Dunlap because he's subsequently won. He won the Barracuda like last month or 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
So who can blame him? But who's winning major championships these days? There's no 21-year-olds winning majors these days. There just isn't. Who's winning on the PGA Tour with regularity these days? It's all guys in their late 20s. It's all these seasoned guys that, 29 to 31. There's nobody super young coming through, apart from Dunlap, and kind of...
Tom Kim?
Yeah, that's a different...
Yeah.
That's a different...
Right.
Because obviously he's from the other side of the world, but there's nobody like say Jordan Spieth coming out really young, winning majors, being a top 3 player in the world. So I would say there's 2 paths, but I would say Sargent's been pretty smart about it. But again, I've no idea what his NIL situation is. But I'm sure he's pretty comfy in what he's doing. I'm sure he's not living in the dorm at Vanderbilt or, he's living in a 10 person house, 7 bedrooms to 10 people. I'm sure that's not his living circumstances.
He's not in the bunk beds right now.
He's not in the bunk bed situation, but it's a real tricky one. Again, if you're at college, if you're at Tennessee with Caleb Surratt, I'm trying to think. There's another really good player that I can't remember off the top of my head. Caleb Surratt is now making $5 million a year. That must be. He must be pretty to some level at least. He must be pretty envious of that. And you think, well, shit, I used to beat him in qualifying every week, and and now he's off spending his time with Bryson, and oh my God, maybe I would probably stay at college if that was an offer for me.
Right. Well, I mean, certainly NIL is one big factor. Huge. That's maybe kind of tamping down some of the urgency to go pro that former generations of players might have felt. in their, junior or senior years of college if they were really, really top elite players. But then at the same time, you have these influences of the PGA Tour's urgency to get more young talent in the pipeline, keep it away from LIV. You have that. And then you have the battling factor of just the trajectory of player development, which has changed in recent years because of changes in technology and instruction. But still, in general, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds are not ready to go out and kill it on the PGA Tour. And so it's almost like, young players at this point are dealing with all these battling influences, pulling them in a variety of different directions. And a lot of these influences might not necessarily be to the benefit of their development as players.
No, you're dead right. Actually, I think these kids coming out of the elite game, elite amateur golf, they're able to match the pros. But over the length of a season, it's a different deal then. But, say somebody like Luke Clanton, he's played 3 times on the PGA Tour this year. I think he finished, what was it? He finished tied second at the Rocket Mortgage. Oh, no, tied second at the John Deere, tied 10th at the Rocket Mortgage and 40th or something at the US Open. But could a player like that sustain it over an entire season with the travel, the grind, the physical exertion? I'm not so sure about that. But what is certainly true, I was chatting about it with somebody this morning, is the difference between the elite amateur players and the kind of middle of the pack PGA. I mean, is there any difference whatsoever? I'm not so sure. I mean, these guys are coming out of college. They've gone 4 or 5 years of college. Ludwig, pretty impressive start. Hovland again, really quite good. So these guys are showing that that there's not much difference between the elite amateurs and the kind of mid-range PGA Tour pros, and in many cases. But I just wonder if they can do it. Hovland was a 4-year college guy. The guys who've come out and really, they're all 4-year college guys. These guys...
Oberg spent a long time in college. I mean, he wasn't a spring chicken when he came out.
Yeah, well, he was... and that's another thing about the Swedes. I spoke earlier about this kid, Simon Hovald, the Swedish kid, who he's not going to college until he's 20 years... He won't start college until he's 20 years old. Ludwig was the same. Ludwig graduated from Texas Tech when he was 24. I'm just not sure that these 20-year-olds or 21-year-olds or 19-year-olds or God forbid the likes of Miles Russell, Blades Brown. I think people again, I better be careful here. You don't want to, because you don't know the particular situations. But people are pushing these kids really very, very young. I'm not entirely sure about the motivations. What exactly is going on there. There's a great player. Actually, he played on the PGA Tour this year. He played in the CG Cup, made the cut. Chris Kim, wonderful kid. Now played with him, absolutely wonderful kid. Great family. Now played with him at the Jack Nicklaus Trophy, which is a kind of junior Walker Cup thing. We won't have to go into that. Great player, won the British Boys last year. But he's hardly played in any amateur events this year. This week he's playing in the Challenge Tour and the European Tour. Is that really? He's 17 years old. Is that really what's best for him at this stage? I really, viewed from the outside, you would probably say no.
Lawrence, I feel like one big topic that maybe goes under the radar or underappreciated is the how few golf courses, with how far the golf ball goes, contest professional golfers at the highest level. And even like you're seeing the difference in signature events versus non-signature events. Like the courses that can put long irons in guys' hands and be demanding, they're few and far between. And I feel like Korn Ferry Tour golf courses and a lot of college golf courses, yes, if you're dominating on those, you're probably more likely to be a great professional golfer. But the difference in the questions that it's asking you seemingly have never felt larger. Like I even think there's probably a case that an elite amateur like Patrick Rogers had a ton of success in college, but it didn't necessarily translate to the professional golf. Well, he's not a great long iron player. I'd be curious from your perspective, does he, especially in the recruiting process with your child, is that a big focus on, hey, when I get to this college program, how are they going to be able to prepare me, not just for the college courses that I'm playing, but I want to make sure I can play major championship golf courses. I want to make sure I can play at Bay Hill. And there's just so few of these opportunities to actually test your skills on that scale.
I'm laughing. You mentioned Patrick Rogers. I remember going down to Stanford to see him at some event, and I don't know if people know the first hole at Stanford. It's a par 5. You hit it over the road, downhill, whatever. Patrick Rogers' driver sand wedge on a par 5, the first hole. You're like, what is this? So actually, funny enough, college courses tend to be quite long. So I don't know, not quite sure what Northwestern should. They're playing at Sahali, which is not that's quite a long golf course, and then they're playing Olympia Fields at the Fight in Illinois, I think, and that's a long golf course. That's again, you caught me out there. There's not many college events that are won like Korn Ferry Tour scores, and then that's not just because the players in the Korn Ferry Tour are better. It's just that the golf courses in the Korn Ferry Tour are better. I think college does again, it's just an impressionistic sense of what's happening. I think it's pretty good preparation. There is enough variety, certainly at the kind of Power 5 conferences. They play a decent variety of golf courses. I went down to the Wake Forest Invitational, was at Pinehurst number 2 this year, and won by Jackson Coyvan, the great Jackson Coyvan. But he won by, I think, a score of 1 under par. So there is a decent variety. But yeah, you make a good point about you look at these Korn Ferry Tour, even the Americas Tour. These events are these are not preparing. They're not preparing, players for the top level. If you're winning on the Korn Ferry Tour 20 under par, then you go to the PG. It's not. You're not ready. You're really not ready for major championship challenges. I really don't think. But so I think I've slightly take issue with I haven't been around the college scene long enough. It's only been a year, but I think it does a pretty good job of preparing kids. I know from our perspective, prepares kids for the grind. You're playing 13 tournaments a year. It's quite a lot. You add in your academics, and all these coaches, and I think every serious program is the same. They're very big on nutrition, very big on strength and conditioning. So I think it's a pretty good preparation. But where I think it goes awry is when you go to the pros, and then I think it gets silly. I think the Korn Ferry Tour is just really not fit for purpose. I really don't think it is. And certainly, if your purpose is to be challenging for major championships, again, I'm sure I can be proven wrong straight away. But I guess Xander didn't stay very long in the Korn. He was in and out of the Korn Ferry Tour, had a quick cup of coffee, and he was on the PGA Tour. But I'm not sure many of the very, very best players in recent years. I'll probably be wrong. People will give me about 10 names.
Well, Scotty Scheffler did. But I think you're right that it's fewer and fewer players are coming up through that system. It used to be that everybody would come up through that kind of process, but now that's not as much the case.
Well, I don't know how long was Scotty on the. I don't know how long Scotty was on the Korn Ferry Tour. I don't think it was
a year, right? Joseph, was he there a year?
Yeah,
he won a few times. It was clear that he was better.
Not long enough to cement any.
No, he wasn't Steven Yeager.
To cement anything different about his game, I don't think.
Right.
Not that. Yeah. Well, he had a lot of injuries at college, but the guys who've come out, Hovland, Albert, these guys have gone straight. Thor Bjornsson, who I think is going to be an absolute superstar. He's not. He's already on the PG Tour. I think he's well on his way to making his card. I think college is it's a tough grind for these kids. I mean, very seldom. That's what made Jackson Coyvan, the kid at Auburn, who I think he finished outside the top 6 once this year in a college event, which is just amazing. And he was a freshman. That's what made his year so remarkable, absolutely incredible. Because again, I'm sure they played a few easy golf courses, but there's a lot of events where it's really hard. Wake Forest Invitational, Pinehurst being one of them.
So one structural factor that we haven't touched on yet that I want to make sure to get to before we wrap up is the World Amateur Golf Ranking. You know, I don't know much about this subject. I've vaguely gotten the sense that people aren't happy with it. I've certainly gotten that message, but I don't really know much about it. Can you give me a sense of what kind of influence this ranking, which is the primary ranking in the amateur game in the U.S., and what influence does it have on the game at the moment?
Well, it's huge. Let me go. It's probably kind of long-winded. WAGR, World Amateur Golf Ranking, is really important in multiple ways. One, it determines fields for amateur events. So if you're 170 on WAGR, you've got no chance of getting into the Western Amateur. The US Amateurs next week. The top 500 get exempt into final qualifying for the US Amateur. The top 100 get exempt into the US Amateur. Okay. US Junior Amateurs, which is a particularly important tournament for, as much as a junior golf tournament can be important, it's a particularly important tournament in the junior world. I think you're top 500, you're into the US Junior Am. So it's a very, the PGA Tour now uses WAGR in determining points. If your career best finish and the WAGR is second, you get X number of points. So the PGA Tour uses WAGR to dish out points in its accelerated program and determine how guys do on PGA Tour University. So WAGR's influence is huge, absolutely huge. So you have that on the one hand, but on the other hand, you have WAGR's. I'm going to use the word corruption. But I don't mean it in its boldest sense. So WAGR's not corrupt. You're not phoning somebody at the USG and saying, "Hey, give me a couple of extra WAGR points, and I'll send you a poached salmon from Scotland or whatever." So it doesn't work like that. But there's all sorts of amazing stories. So when you get to the top 10 in WAGR, or maybe the top 50, you can basically say that that's quite good. I mean, you can argue about it at the margins. WAGR is calculated over the space of 2 years, which is stupid. It's absolutely stupid. So guys who have still got a high ranking have played shit for the last 9 months, but played great 18 months ago, and they'll be 15th in the world or 9th in the world, which is plainly ridiculous. So there's that criticism at the very highest level. But apart from that, it's kind of just about fine. But once you start getting into, I'll give you a for instance. Oh, better be careful here. So something else I forgot to mention. WAGR determines membership of teams. So GB&I team for the Walker Cup next year, as is currently constituted, the captain of the GB&I is a guy called Dean Robertson, a good. I better suck up here just in case, No, Dean.
Wonderful man.
Oh, just the best.
The best.
No. I was going to say he was a great player, Dean Robertson. He won on the European Tour. Fabulous, great swing. But he's good picking 10 guys. 5 of those guys will be the top 5 guys on WAGR. So if you're a GB&I player and you're one of the 5 best GB&I guys as ranked by WAGR, you're on the Walker Cup team. A very big deal. So that fact, how does that influence what players do? Obviously, it influences them to play better, but it also influences, and this is the case in the USG as well, also influences players to where they play, what tournaments they play in. Once upon a time when none of this stuff existed, players would just go and play. They're having the US Amateur at Cypress Point. Oh, geez, I'm definitely going to go to that. I say that's a bad example. But so players would just go and play. Now players are very, very careful about where they play because they don't want to impact their WAGR. And I'm talking about the very, very best players all around the world. Incidentally, I'm talking about Walker Cup teams. I'm talking about Eisenhower Trophy teams, which is the World Amateur Golf Team Championship. The best 3 guys I can only speak for Scotland. I think 2 of the 3 guys are the best 2 guys picked off WAGR. How does it influence players? Where they play? And once upon a time, they would just go and play. And now they're nursing. And you can see it. They're nursing their WAGR rankings. They're taking care not to play I'll give you, for instance, if you go and play in the Welsh Amateur Championship, you're a top player and you go and play in the Welsh Amateur Championship, say you're 40th on the rank, the Wagger, and if you stay in 40th place, you will get picked for the Walker Cup team. So your incentive to skip your national championship, the Welsh Amateur National Championship, is huge, because in order to nurse your Wagger, you've really got to finish first or second in that tournament. You might have a bad week, you might have the flu and go and finish 50th. You'll get minimal points, and that will take your Wagger ranking down. So players don't want that to happen. So you see it all over the place now. It's a real, I think there's a great guy on Twitter called Amateur Golf Bible, a guy called Mark Healy. I think he mentioned last week, of the top 25 English guys on Wagger, I think only 10 of them played in the English National Amateur last week. 15 guys missed it.
Wow.
And I'm sure there are all sorts of different reasons for that, but I guarantee you, somewhere in the mix of all of that, there'll be guys looking to nurse their Wagger ranking. So it's a really not a good thing, you'd have to say. Further down the rankings, it's wholesale. I mean, I will use the word corruption. When you have national federations in obscure places setting up tours specifically for their elite players. So to run a Wagger tournament, all you really need, you need 10 players, and you need, I think it's 10 players, and you need to play 54 holes. And there might be a minimum number of Wagger players need to be ranked in the field or something like that. So you have, I'm not sure this goes on, but it used to go on, national federations would set up, I won't name the European country, but it's a small European country that nobody's really ever heard of, would set up tournaments, and they would they'd get their 11 best players, and they would have like 11 events, and they would instruct each player to win an event. So this week's going to be your event, Joseph, and next week, Garrett, you're going to win the event. And the purpose of that is, if you win a Wagger event, the minimum number of points that the winner of a Wagger event gets is 7.5. Huge. So if you finish 50th in the Western Amateur, huge event, massive event, very important event. If you finish 50th in the Western Amateur, let's say you'll probably get 6.5 points. Compared to Garrett Morrison winning the Lithuanian something tour, you get 7.5. So can you see where the corruption comes into? I use the country Lithuania. I'm not saying it was Lithuania, but so
it was Liechtenstein. We're calling out
Liechtenstein, right? Yeah. We're calling. So the point being, it's very, very easily manipulated for malevolent purposes. For instance, I called them out on social media last year. There was a private school in Scotland set up a tour, set up events basically for their own kids to play in. It was essentially they're farming Wagger points. So why is this important? It's important because the top 500 get automatic exemption into the US Amateur. It's important because the British Boys Championship is taken off the Wagger rankings. They go down the Wagger rankings, and you're selected based on your, for a place in the field based on your Wagger rankings. So it's it's very hard to imagine there's a perfect system, but as currently constituted, it's a pretty imperfect situation for a very, very important thing in amateur golf.
Now, to finish here, I mean, that's fascinating info, Lawrence. That definitely clarifies things for me. And if people are angry about the OWGR right now, I think maybe they should be more upset, arguably, about Wagger. But in any case, just to finish here, if I were just to appoint you the czar of amateur golf, and this is something that I think it might be a good thing, right? To keep it simple, what is the first directive? What is the first big fix or simple thing that you either take away or implement to make the experience better for young golfers?
I would take away rankings, particularly junior rankings. That's really it. I think that would solve a lot of issues about where players play, how they behave, how parents behave. If you remove the significance of rankings, I think overall, certainly junior golf would improve hugely. And I know, and at the elite amateur level, again, it's hard because there's so much at stake now. There's so much money at stake. There's so much prestige at stake. I don't know. You could remove the rankings at the highest level, but certainly at junior level, it would improve behavior, just enormously. I would also, again, I'll get murdered for this. I'd abolish the AGGA. I just think, and just go to a regional, like now it didn't play a lot, but as a junior golfer, but the JGA NCA or whatever it's called, the Junior Golf Association in Northern California, was just a brilliant breeding ground. As last week, just very quickly, last week at the Western, at one point in the tournament, 3 of the top 4 came through the JGGNC. Koiven, Gilligan, Zach Polo, a great player out of Arizona, all came through, the junior system. And these were 3 kids that really barely touched. I mean, Jackson played a lot of AGG later in his career, and that's fine. He was looking for good competition. But the rankings they provoke all sorts of terribly bad behaviour, and put too much pressure on kids. At the upper level, oh my goodness, I'd get rid of agents. They're the US Amateur next week, they're going to be crawling all over the place. I believe somebody told me yesterday again that I think there's 250 kids playing college golf now who are making money.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure that's great for them, and I'm sure it's a great help because elite amateur golf is an expensive business, believe you me, and I'm sure the money helps. But I think it might provoke all kinds of kind of bad behavior. So there you go.
I think that wanting to get rid of agents might be where the journalists and the parents meet and shake hands, don't you think?
I'm not so sure. I'm guessing some. Oh, actually, yeah. Given I don't know if everybody's. I should we reference that Dunlap story last week? That was an amazing story. Oh boy.
Yeah, it's a nasty situation. And your first, people should read that article by Josh Carpenter for Sports Business Journal about Nick Dunlap and the lawsuit that's ongoing between his agency and his family. But the first question you ask when you see an article like that is like, why is the agent so involved before the kid turns pro? To the extent that it becomes a dispute once he does turn pro. And so I think it's about serving the kids, right? Junior golf, amateur golf should be kid-centric. That's my perspective on it. Maybe this is just the former teacher in me speaking, but when I think of junior athletics, it's got to be something that is more focused on the child. And it seems like a lot of aspects of junior golf and amateur golf don't really have that motive. And so maybe that's just what we need to get back to somehow or another, though I don't have much optimism that it will.
We sound like 2 old guys here.
We do.
We do.
Our gray hairs are showing.
That's never going. Although in saying that, you're talking about the Nick Dunlap situation. Yeah. The agency, I don't think they were named. It was GSC. It's Bryson DeChambeau's agency. The agency he's with. I note this week that they've got two top guys just out of PGA Tour University have just come out. Have just signed with GSC, so it doesn't seem to be doing them any harm. You read a story like that, and you think, oh my God, they're toast. Apparently, they're not toast. Far from it.
My goodness. Well, Lawrence, this has been a total delight. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And of course, best of luck to Niall and the US Amateur this week. We'll be following along and hope he has a great experience.
Listen, thanks for that. Thanks, Joseph. Thanks, Garrett.
All right. So Joseph and I are back for recommendations. Before we get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit about Friday Golf getting into the book business. We've actually partnered with Josh Pettit and the Alistair MacKenzie Institute on the release of MacKenzie's book, Golf Architecture. So this is a groundbreaking book in the history of golf architecture. It was released in 1920. And a lot of people might be familiar with Spirit of St. Andrews from MacKenzie, but Golf Architecture was kind of the original version of that. And it has so much of the analysis and the passages, the quotes that are very famous from MacKenzie's body of work. So this is a really great and concise book about golf course design, probably the single best single volume book to read if you're getting into reading about golf architecture. So these books will ship out in about 6 to 8 weeks. Now, cheap copies of this book can be found on the internet, but Josh went to great lengths to recreate the original edition of this book by manually typing out the entire text and retypesetting the whole book. So this is as close to a true reproduction of the original book as possible. There's nothing else available that's anything like this. So we would like people to go to MacKenzie.golf. That's the very simple URL where you can find your copy of this book, and you can use the promo code FRIEDEGG, all one word, for 10% off your copy of MacKenzie's original Golf Architecture Edition. Really, really great thing here, and a wonderful book. All right, so Joseph, let's do recommendations. What are you recommending this week?
Yeah, a little bit of a random one, but there's a podcast.
That's what this segment is all about, man. This is about randomness here.
That was an unnecessary preface. There's a podcast called Acquired that a lot of my friends are into on just how certain businesses got started. Specifically, I would recommend the episode about the NFL, which was released in January of 2023. Not just because the NFL season is coming up, but I think it is pretty instructive in considering the golf world right now as it's being shaped and some of the ingredients that made the NFL successful and why they set things up the way that they did, how the business model, they had the foresight to create competitive parity and stress that, and some of the media deals that they entered into. I do, while I was listening to it, if you know a ton about the NFL, you might not learn a bunch, but considering some of the same problem sets that are faced by the professional golf world as everything is kind of getting shaken up and potentially some kind of deal gets put back together, I thought it was a useful exercise to listen to that pod and consider what the implications for golf. So it's a big commitment. It might be like 3 hours.
Yeah, I know. Believe it or not, this was a backup recommendation for me today. I was thinking about recommending the Acquired podcast, not that specific episode. I think the one that I would have guided people toward would have been maybe the recent Starbucks episode where they actually did one of their kind of narrative podcasts with Howard Schultz in the room with them. Pretty awesome offering there. But when it's just the two hosts going through one of these company stories, it's a really, really compelling podcast. Very good storytelling. And yes, the episodes can be 3-4 hours long. Sometimes for some companies like NVIDIA, for example, they'll do multi-part episodes that are just kind of epic. But it's a very, very engaging podcast and one that I would recommend as well. So the recommendation that I'm going to make is actually another podcast. So we're just like directing people to other podcasts, but that's fine. We want people to listen to a lot of podcasts here.
Competition is good.
We want people coming back on the podcast app, listening to us as well as these other great ones. The one that I've been kind of mainlining recently, in addition to Acquired, is the Big Picture podcast from The Ringer, hosted by Sean Fennessy and Amanda Dobbins. This is a chat show about movies, essentially, but the specific genre of episode within this podcast that I've been listening to is the movie draft episodes, where they bring in Chris Ryan, who's another kind of Ringer universe personality, and they draft movies from certain years in different categories. So there's categories like blockbuster or comedy or drama or, action / horror / thriller. And they look at movies from a specific year and they kind of do a snake draft of the movies to see who can come up with the best lineup of movies. And I've really enjoyed these. I think a lot of people really enjoy these. I think they've been very successful episodes for The Big Picture because they keep doing them over and over. And in fact, they're running out of kind of like years in the past 4 decades to do at this point. But I've been basically listening to these from the beginning within the last few weeks, and I find them very, very fun. There's a great dynamic between the hosts, and it's a good way to kind of remember movies that you saw at the time but haven't revisited since, and just be like, yeah, I should go back and watch that again. Like The Mummy, for instance, the Brendan Fraser movie. It's such a great little action movie that Hollywood doesn't really make anymore, completely original. And it's just a fun watch. And it's basically available for free online. I think it's on Tubi or something, but that's the kind of movie that I remember seeing in the theaters when it came out, but then forgetting about and not really going back to. And so these movie draft podcasts are kind of a great way to remember some of those things. So Big Picture Podcast, I think it's a really, really high quality pod. All right, Joseph, I think that's it for today. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks, Garrett. That was fun.
This episode of the Fried Egg Golf Podcast was produced by PJ Clark. Thank you, PJ. We want to make sure that people are aware that Fried Egg Golf has a pro shop. Go to proshop.thefriedegg.com. I believe that's the URL. Pretty confident that's the URL. We have a lot of great stuff there. Our merch czar, Meg Atkins, does a wonderful job of creating good-looking, inventive products that I think you'll really like. So go there and just see what we have. We all have all sorts of new offerings with various logos. There's some funny stuff, and then there's just some stuff that looks really, really nice. So proshop.thefriedegg.com, see what we have there. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back again soon with another episode.